Welcome to The Ethical Advocate for Accidents.
Welcome to the Ethical Advocate for Accidents with Attorney James Sadigh. For more than 35 years, James has helped injured Californians navigate personal injury claims, insurance disputes, habitability issues, and wrongful termination matters, always with a focus on ethics and clear, honest communication. I'm Leanne Lyon, and today we're joined by criminal defense attorney Jasmin Haghani. Together, we're discussing what happens in California when a driver leaves the scene of an accident and how a hit and run charge intersects with an injury claim. Hello again. It's great to be here.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Jasmin, we'll start with you. Jasmin, under California law, what legally qualifies as a hit and run? And does it matter whether the accident caused property damage or injuries?
So that's a great question. And I get asked this question all the time. So, in California, once you're given a driver's license, then you agree and consent to stopping anytime that there is a collision or I'd say even the slightest property damage and leaving your information with the other party, whether or not, it's a parked car or, it's an ongoing collision, then yeah, it's your duty to stop, leave your information. If, there's nobody there, leave your contact information, phone number, but if there is obviously, this is during you're driving, it's not a parked car, there's another party involved, then yes, of course, to get out of the car, first make sure everybody's okay. Render if there is a collision, and there's another party or other parties, more than one involved, then yes, you have a duty to get out of the car, make sure that everybody's okay, call, for the paramedics if needed, and of course exchange your information, your phone number, driver's license, insurance information, and yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. It's very basic, very simple, but we get a lot of hit and run situations, I think, that end up backfiring because it turns, and I know we'll get there, but it can quickly turn into a criminal incident, without people realizing.
So, if a driver leaves the scene and is later identified, what kind of criminal exposure are they facing?
So I would say as soon as you leave that scene, that's where the crime begins. Because it's not a crime to hit somebody, it's an accident. Of course, unless it's intentional, that's a different conversation. But usually it's an accident, and so there is no crime to hit somebody. The crime starts when you decide, I'm leaving. I'm not leaving my information. I'm just going to take off. Whether it's a parked car, or obviously somebody that you hit in the street, and so hit and runs can be charged in two different ways. Usually, when it's property damage, it is a misdemeanor. And, usually when it's, more serious and there's more serious injuries involved, or even sometimes even alcohol involved, now we're talking felony world. And so, obviously it's more serious. Sometimes in some cases, if the injuries are minor or, based on the circumstances, it could still be charged as a misdemeanor. It really depends on the circumstances.
James, in a personal injury case, does leaving the scene automatically strengthen the claim, or is liability still something that has to be proven separately?
It has a psychological factor. Um, Usually, of course, we always believe that the person who left the scene without the information may have been at fault and doesn't want to be identified to be sued or pay the damages. That's why they're escaping the scene. But that's not necessarily all the time. We've had situations that the person leaves the scene, he or she may not have been 100% at fault, but they didn't have insurance, so they were afraid that if they are identified because of lack of insurance under California law, they may lose their driver's license or that they may not be able to afford the cost of the other person's thing or hiring an attorney. Sometimes there are some undocumented immigrants who, despite the fact that California has been a sanctuary city, they're still scared that if the police come to the scene or if they identify themselves, they may be picked up by ICE and be deported. So there are many reasons that people uh, leave the scene and subject themselves, of course, to criminal proceeding that way, which is worse than what they thought. Um, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are at fault. However, if the physical evidence shows that they may have been at fault, then fleeing the scene strengthens the psychological factor of proving that they are at fault. Because most of the people would sit there and say, well, if he wasn't at fault, he wouldn't have left the scene. So it becomes easier for us in a civil case to do that. Yes.
So, if the driver is never identified, what options does an injured person have in California to pursue compensation?
Well, if he's not identified and there is no signs of him, there presumably a big percentage of the people in California, when they buy insurance on their vehicle, there is aside from the coverage for the liability and what we call comprehensive and collision for the damage to their vehicles, they may have a coverage that is called uninsured motorist. In that situation, if they can prove to the insurance company that it was a hit and run and they couldn't have the identity and they comply with the policy provisions, then they can bring the claim against their own insurance company, and their own insurance company, in a way, replaces the insurance company for the party at fault and pays all of the same damages, which includes medical bills, loss of earning, pain, and suffering, except to the limit that is provided under the insurance policy. Now, those limits may be different everyone's.
Jasmine, can a criminal conviction for hit and run be used in a related civil lawsuit?
I would say yes. And it kind of, overlaps with other situations that we see when criminal law and civil law are overlapping, especially in a situation like this. And I would say that there are ways to resolve situations first. I would say civilly. Um, Usually we can ask for, the civil attorney could ask for a stay on the proceedings. And while we figure out, the criminal disposition. So, whether it does or doesn't result in a criminal conviction, I'd say that, it could have bearing, through every step of the procedure if it's not, if the two attorneys don't communicate, whether it's the defense attorney and the other attorney on the other side, then yes, I think that it could definitely affect the other proceeding.
I have to add a caveat here, and that's on the situations that a person is found to be possibly at fault for the accident, but at the same time he has committed hit and run, or sometimes even drunk driving, but mostly on a hit and run situation. That the attorney in the criminal matter may be able to go to the criminal court and propose, and if it's accepted, to do a civil compromise for that matter, to say, instead of putting my client in a criminal proceeding and sentencing, he will agree to pay all the damages for the other side, especially if he has insurance and if he can get his insurance company to agree to pay all the damages of the injured party or the damaged party, and make a petition to the court. And if the district attorney agrees, of course, see that maybe they do not press the criminal charges in his record and just accept the civil compromise, which of course I'm sure Jasmine knows those petitions better than I. It was very old age that I did those, and proceedings may have changed since then.
No, we still do have those. I recently had a situation where my client had hit a bunch of parked cars and she fled the scene. Not because she didn't care that she had hit these cars, it's because she was undocumented. And so she was afraid um, of stopping and the police coming. And, we talked a lot and I got to know her. And it really came from a place of fear. It wasn't from a place of like, well, they're not going to catch me. And of course, they did catch her. But we were able to come up with kind of like what James said, a civil compromise. We'll get all the damages paid. And in fact, we won't even dispute it. And that was the win for my client, was that, yeah, maybe some of the damages were a little, extreme, but, because of the exchange for no criminal record, not even, putting your name into that system, when you have a pending immigration situation that's going to come forward, what is that worth to you? And so, it was worth it for her, and she came and she paid and she wrote a letter expressing, deep remorse, and she paid for all the damages. And in exchange, the district attorney, the city attorney actually decided not to file against her. And so, exactly like what James just said, there are situations where, yeah, we're like, all right, it's a slap on the wrist. Don't do that again. Get these people back to get their, make them whole again, as they say in law. And so that was a situation just like James said, where somebody, not that they were like, let off easy. They had to pay all of it and go through the stress of, being possibly filed against in a criminal court. But, it was ultimately, it worked out.
Great. Jasmine, are there situations when someone may not realize that they technically committed a hit and run? And how does that intent factor into the criminal charge?
Yeah, I see this all the time. I would say that, someone's backing up and they tap the other car and they don't even realize, sometimes people do kind of hit a little bit. It's a little scratch here and there. I mean, I've come back to my car. I've seen a couple scratches that I hadn't seen before. And so I would say, it really depends. If you're on camera and you hit somebody, and there's so many cameras these days everywhere. And so, and it's so easy for somebody to be standing, nearby the car, and they see that you hit the car. They snap a picture of your license plate, and all of a sudden, you've got a cop coming after you, calling you, trying to question you. But I'd really say that it depends on the damage and the reasonableness of the circumstances of the situation. If I'm driving a vehicle that perhaps doesn't have any loud sensors and I did tap a car, for example, and my music's on and it was very innocent, I didn't mean to tap the car, hit the car, and I drive off, I would think that, perhaps it would be very hard to prove that somebody had tried to do it on purpose, versus a reasonable person would have realized that they hit this car given the circumstances. But I would say if you didn't realize that and it was something, more innocent, as they would say, then I don't think that anyone's going to come, arrest you unless it really could be proved that, you did it on purpose and you drove away.
Actually, let me remind Jasmine that we shared a case where, without naming names, the client was so drunk behind the wheels that when she actually drove her car into a series of cars, one of them damaged really bad, and even the client's vehicle was damaged totally. She left the scene without noticing it herself until she gets home, gets out of the car, and says, "Oh my God, there's a damage to my car." So sometimes people are too drunk to even realize it, but which is, makes the matter even worse for them.
Wild. So, when a criminal case and the injury lawsuit are moving at the same time, what practical steps help avoid one proceeding unintentionally complicating the other one?
I'll take that first. Usually, on a civil proceeding, you don't need to bring a lawsuit right away. You have a statute of limitations in California for injuries for 2 years, and for property damage 3 years. So instead of immediately file a lawsuit, we may make a claim or whatever to the insurance company, but we're not going to push it. And as much as possible, we're not going to put the client in a position to talk and explain his claim and or give any testimony. And we just lay back and wait for the criminal defense attorney to do his, or in case of Jasmin, hair magic, to try to take care of the criminal side to the best of ability under the circumstances for the client. And since the client usually, in most circumstances, is not giving any testimony in a criminal matter before it is resolved, nothing can be used against him in the civil case, unless, of course, there is a conviction. But usually, if it's a plea bargain or a civil compromise or things of that nature, then we're home free. We can proceed with the civil case.
Right. And I would say that actually did come up recently. And not directly, but I would say that, for this specific client, we were able to reason with the city attorney, and she paid restitution. But then, after she paid a hefty amount of restitution, she called me and she said, could these people come after me civilly? And so, it becomes a situation where, all right, what are they coming after you for civilly? Right? Because if there's nothing more than property damage and we paid for the property damage already, then what other claim is left for them, to come after you? And so I would say that, I mean, I agree with everything that James had said in regards to the separate proceedings, but could it have triggered, more damages if somebody was there, got injured as a result or whatnot? And, luckily the city attorney was willing to work something out, and then, a year later, the the victim of the incident, starts developing some more pain, or something comes up in that way, would they be able to now come after my client civilly? And I would think that the answer is yes, because the property damage was taken care of. And so, in a very unique situation where this would happen, I would say that the victim of the accident would have, a couple of years to come after the defendant, or the person who had caused the accident. And so, yeah, that's exactly what James had said as well.
Well, that's it for today's episode of the Ethical Advocate for Accidents. Huge thanks to Jasmin Haghani for being here. And if you'd like to learn more about Attorney James Sadigh and his work representing injured Californians, please visit jamesksadigh.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to leave a review, and subscribe to the show so you are sure to catch the next episode. Thank you, Jasmin, and thank you, James.
Have
Thank
a
you
good
so
night.
much. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.